another one at 5, I'm afraid, over at the ACC. National Grid. Oh, at 5:10 it says. Okay. Is this just going till 5:30? Yeah, so you know that I've got to leave early again.
I don't think I'd be able to put
right, okay. Well, the trouble is that one starts at 5, but I think they've got me down as arriving late. So 5.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I know it might have been a bit of a struggle for a few of you to get here, so I know they've closed the doors downstairs, so thank you very much for joining us today and bearing with us. This is the third event I've done with Kerry today. Our previous ones were on the energy system and skills and farming, so I'm sure Kerry is very bored of hearing from me, so you're going to hear as little as possible from me in this session, and as much as possible from our speakers. I'm Luke Murphy. I'm the Associate Director for Energy, Climate, Housing and Infrastructure at IPPR, and as I'm sure you'll all be aware, this is a session on how we can ramp up retrofit to ease the cost of living pressures. I think by way of introduction, I just wanted to say that IPPR have done a lot of work on home retrofit and its importance. We've done a report that was supported by Santander in the past, and we're really grateful for their support for that, and also for this event, setting out what a route map looks like to deliver on the retrofit mission that we all know we need to deliver. And why do we need to do that? And I think even before this current energy crisis, delivering a retrofit program at scale across the country was hugely important. We have a sector, it's 19% of emissions from households, and so it's always been essential to meet that challenge, and the only way to do that is through a retrofit program. But the energy crisis has really brought in into sharp relief the huge benefits that there are from a retrofit program, from energy efficiency measures, and also moving over to clean heat through heat pumps. We know that a whole house retrofit can deliver £430 off household bills. And just imagine if we've been doing that for several years already, households would have saved billions, and the kind of intervention that the government has brought forward in terms of the energy price freeze, I think someone calculated would save between 15 and 20 billion of public money had we been doing retrofit at scale for the last decade. Just a report we put out last week showed the jobs and levelling up benefit and means to tackle regional inequality that a retrofit programme could deliver. We know that some of the leakiest homes in the country are in regions outside London and the South East, and the real beauty of a retrofit programme is that you can't move the homes, so the jobs do have to be created here, and they do have to be created locally, so there's huge benefits. So 900,000 jobs by 2030, 2.7 million jobs by 2050, according to our research. And lastly, and not least, delivering warmer homes and finally combating climate change. Indeed, as many have said, it really is a no-brainer. And IPPR have set out our local street-by-street plan. We've called for a £7 billion package investment in retrofit annually every year. We've called for a thing called a Green Go scheme. We think we need a national scheme. If you think of, we don't necessarily endorse the policy itself, but if you think of Help to Buy for housing, everyone has heard of it, more or less, even whether you're buying a house or not. We think you need a similar brand called Green Go that's advertised in advice centres across the country, so everyone knows about it, everyone can go there for energy advice, and everyone can also go there to get the grants and loans that the government should absolutely be offering to households, with particularly larger grants to poorer households in order to deliver on this. So those are our plans, and we know that last year we were really pleased to see Keir Starmer set out Labour's plans for doing that, and it was really great to see that commitment in the leader's speech. And we're going to hear more about that today, and whether there's been any kind of further advance on that from Kerry, and we're also going to hear from our other excellent speakers, Gillian Cooper, who's the Head of Energy Policy at Citizens Advice, and also Nick Potter, who's the Head of Mortgages at Santander. Unfortunately, Bindi Patel isn't able to join us today from Vattenfall. But we're going to kick off to hear from Kerry, who is the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Net Zero. and as I said, has been talking, well, as it was you've had 3 events with me,
Yeah.
but that doesn't even touch the slides of
Loud.
all of the events you've been doing today. But thank you very much for joining us, Kerry.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you, Luke, and apologies in advance. I'm going to shoot a little bit early to arrive late at the next thing, and that's been my pattern all day, is like running from one thing to another, and also, you know, just getting horribly lost. I think at one point I had 3 people trying to show me the way, and it was still like pretty confusing. But yeah, I mean, I pretty much could have, you know, Luke's stolen a lot of what I was going to say in terms of introductory remarks, but I suppose if I make my starting point, the fact that Labour did make this pledge, you know, Rachel Reeves last year, the 28 billion a year for 10 years to the climate investment pledge, and of that, 6 billion towards retrofitting homes, which we estimate would cover 19 million homes. So that was the pledge that was made last year. I suppose the difference that, yeah, that pledge still stands. So that's a 60 billion programme over the decade. I suppose the 2 things that have changed is, one is the government has done absolutely nothing on that. So our estimate is that 2 million homes or so could have been made far more fuel efficient, could have had that fuel saving of £430 that Luke talked about if they'd acted sooner. So a year's been lost. And the other thing, of course, is the energy bills crisis has just thrown it into far sharper relief that we absolutely need to act in terms of home energy efficiency, things that can bring down bills, as well as giving people the financial support they need to get through the short-term crisis. I think the things that I'm fairly new to this brief. I did have the green transport brief, and before that was shadow deference of sort of, there's various aspects of climate change that I've been very immersed in, like electric vehicles or whatever, or nature-friendly farming. Newer to this side of things, but the things that I would say, and you know, the Environmental Justice Commission has been really IPPR have been really helpful in some of this. Firstly, it's one thing to identify that you're going to spend money on this programme. You need to look at delivery vehicles, and local authorities will have a major role to play in terms of social housing, but also in terms of their poor quality private stock, whether that's owner-occupier or whether it's privately rented. So it's very much linked to all that we're trying to do in terms of making landlords responsible for the condition of their property and so on. But also just capacity in local authorities, whether they've got the staff that can work on these projects and identify priorities. But then the skills side of things. It's one thing saying, we've got the money to retrofit the homes, but unless you've got people that are involved in the retrofitting business, then obviously delivery is going to stall. And we've seen over the last decade or so, the fact that when the coalition government came in, it sort of axed the programme that Labour had introduced in terms of home insulation. Then you've had various programmes that been stop and start, very dodgy people involved in trying to deliver them. My constituency casework certainly had people who were being ripped off by people. They'd got the grants, but then when being asked for an awful lot of money towards the work, or the work just wasn't being done. So if you were somebody that was looking to set up a business doing something, sort of on the manual side of things, would you go into retrofitting if you weren't certain that the government was going to be behind actually funding that sort of work and that there would be a market there? So I think that's what is brilliant about the fact that Labour is being very clear that we have a decade-long pledge. And you've heard yesterday about the Clean Power Pledge, you heard today about the National Wealth Fund, there'll be more tomorrow. But the fact that we have really nailed our colours to the mast and said, fairer, greener future, this is where the jobs of the future are, this is where the answer to the energy crisis is, this is where we need to develop skills. Hopefully that will give people the certainty that they just don't have at the moment, that yes, it's a good time to go into retrofitting, to heat pumps, all sorts of green skilled jobs, because when you're talking about things that bigger industries, like say electric vehicles, whatever, you've got big companies that are making a decision. It's partly based on market response, but it's also things like the government bringing in a ban on new petrol and diesel vehicles, and there were plugging grants and incentives. Big companies can sort of talk to the government, scent the way the wind's blowing, and make calculations. If you're a sole trader or an SME that is going into this field, you need to have a far greater degree of certainty that this is what you want to do. So I think the skills base and making sure that the supply, the demand is there, but the supply side of it as well is going to be really important. And I think also, like I said, the housing market, the renters' rights agenda is absolutely going to be crucial as well in terms of what landlords will be prepared to do. Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Kerry. Next, I'll come to Gillian for a few opening remarks.
Sure. So we all know we've got an unprecedented crisis with energy bills at the moment. And the past decisions have obviously left us much more exposed than we needed to be. At Citizens Advice, we're providing a huge amount of crisis support to people who simply cannot afford to buy food, to keep the lights on in their homes. So in the short term, we very much think that we're going to need more targeted support to help people through this winter in particular. And then we've got the massive challenge where there is a large degree of consensus that we need to tackle the energy demand problems with our homes, but we're not really doing enough about it. Energy efficiency measures are obviously the best way to increase our energy security as a nation and as a household and as a business. Our research that we published last week showed that the average home, which is rated Energy Performance Certificate D, can save more than £350 a year if it's improved to Energy Performance Certificate C, and the most inefficient homes can save almost £1,000 a year by being brought up to that level, and that's a collective saving of $8.1 billion each year that households don't need to pay. And it's important to point out too, with the new cap on the cap for the next 2 years, that's the government shouldering that cost of the energy efficiency burden. We know that there's sort of quite significant interest in people wanting to make their homes more efficient, but there are quite a lot of barriers to sort of anyone who's interested in doing this. Cost is the most obvious one, but it's also incredibly hard to understand what products are right for their home or who should install them and in what order. Other people might be put off by scams and the well-publicized failures of previous energy efficiency schemes. When the Green Home Grant was live, scams were the biggest issue people called our consumer service helpline about, because scammers always sense an opportunity. So we definitely need strategic leadership from the government to remove these barriers and drive the sustainable consumer demand for energy efficiency, and that will help us grow the market in the longer term. I think sort of we've got a lot of similarities with a report we published last week with the IPPR report, except we called it a Great British Energy Efficiency Scheme. I like Gringo as well. Nice, good name. And that's just something that sort of helps upgrade the nation's homes to EPC and cut the energy efficiency penalty. We laid out a couple of key principles that we think it needs to follow. It needs to be simple and easy for people to engage and understand. It needs to be signposted. You need awareness campaigns to drive demand, designed with different accessibility and communications needs in mind. It needs to be supported with financial support, advice, and consumer protections. I think advice in particular needs a lot more funding in this space. What exists at the moment in England is woeful compared to what exists, say, in Scotland. It needs to be sustainable, and the funding for the scheme should be set at a level that can be maintained throughout the policy's lifetime, because we've had a lot of boom and bust in previous energy efficiency schemes. So the support needs to be targeted. We think it should include fully funded grants up to £10,000 for those struggling the most to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. We think there should be partial grants for households on a basis of a sliding scale according to household income. And I think it's important to say that all households are feeling this crisis, not just those on the lowest incomes. In a survey we carried out, 65% of respondents cited price as the main reason why they're not thinking about making changes to their homes. And 62% said being offered a grant would have a moderate to large impact on their decision to invest. And I think that, just getting this market kick-started is really essential. And then we can sort of develop the long-term enablers via the home buying and selling process and the mortgage market. And again, as Kerry's pointed out as well, we need to make sure that landlords are properly incentivized to invest in this, because the worst housing we've got in this country is in the private rented sector. The second most important thing we've got is that there does need to be long-term support to end the cycle of boom and bust that we've had. Because if you were an installer, again, as Kerry's pointed out, you'd probably, if you'd looked at what had happened in the market, you probably wouldn't be thinking about going into this because there's just been a lot of uncertainty over the years. And it's also undermined consumer trust as well. The Green Homes Grant was an unfortunate failure. And I think out of 52% of homeowners had their vouchers rejected or withdrawn from that scheme. And that has put a lot of people off, so there's going to need to be some work to rebuild trust. And thirdly, and lastly, consumer protections. If we want large numbers of people taking action here, we need to future-proof the consumer protection regime. We'd like to see a single accreditation and inspection body that sets standards and has proper enforcement powers to take action against companies that don't meet its standards. Right now, we've got a plethora of codes. It's very confusing. If you experience problems, you don't really know who to go to, and the protections are inconsistent amongst the various codes. We need to sort that out. And that would help drive, again, more demand in this and give people the confidence. So we're in a really funny situation right now because the return on investment for energy efficiency has never been greater, but the cost of living crisis means that it's still out of reach for too many households, and we need to get the right enablers in place and help the public take action. And again, it's not just the economic benefits for individuals. The benefits of living in a warmer, comfortable home are immense, and that's something that everyone deserves in a society.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Julian. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Afternoon, everyone. In a single sentence, the way we see it is that the transition to low-carbon heating in homes is probably the biggest change to the UK housing market in modern times, for a generation, certainly. Just to reiterate some of the stats that we've had, there's 29 million homes in the UK, and only a third of them are energy performance certificate EPC rated A to C. So that's those who are unfamiliar with the EPC system, and that will be lots of people, because some research we've done suggests that around 60% of people don't know their current EPC, and certainly if you haven't moved home recently or had other cause to have an EPC done, why not? Why would you know that? So that means around 20 million homes need to invest money, retrofits, to get up to a minimum standard of C, which is kind of acceptable, let's say. If A is very energy efficient and G is very energy inefficient, C is kind of let's say a midpoint that we're targeting all homes to get to by 2035. As Luke mentioned, residential homes emit around 20% of total UK emissions, so about the same as all the traffic transport on the roads. And it feels to me like people generally are further on the road to accepting electric vehicles or decarbonisation of vehicles than they are in homes. So I think most people think, well, next car will be electric, perhaps, or I can see that the charging points are springing up around the country, and we don't really see the same, motivation around homes just yet, although we think we're probably on the brink of seeing that. So essentially, I think whether you're a homeowner, a landlord, or indeed a tenant in rental sector, we're all part of that journey. So we're all going to play a part in reaching the net zero by 2050. But we don't know that yet. I mean, no one's written a letter to me telling me I'm on this journey, but we are on this journey. We've been doing a lot of research as well with customers, homeowners, colleagues within Santander, and also other parts of the supply chain, so mortgage brokers, estate agents, and we're seeing some really interesting themes, and I've got some stats that hopefully I'll be able to share over the course of the rest of the session. But as a headline, just to reiterate, challenges definitely. So if I'm a homeowner now, and someone says to me, I need to retrofit my property to get from a D to a B or whatever that target might be, I don't really know how best to do that. I know it's going to cost me a lot of money, and I know some of the technology is new. It might also become obsolete. So am I backing the right horse? Am I spending the money where I should spend it the best? But twinned with that, there is opportunity. So the research we did suggests 80% of people broadly are receptive to kind of, if you like, doing the right thing, and engaged in the topic, albeit they don't really know how best to go about it as a rule. And as already touched on, clearly there's huge potential for investment and jobs. At the moment, these stats might be slightly out of date, but there was around 2,000 people in the UK employed in the supply and fitting of heat pumps, which is about 1% of the number of people employed in fitting gas boilers. So if my boiler breaks down today, I'm most likely to get a new gas boiler rather than a heat pump, and that needs to change.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Nick. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions of the panel, then I'll open it up to the audience. And I've got one for each, if that's all right. Nick, I'm kind of interested as to whether you think there's actually more that mortgage lenders can do in the absence of further government intervention or requirements or regulation. Is there more, is there more that actually the mortgage lenders can do to step up to kind of encourage homeowners in particular, obviously those with mortgages, to do more? So that was one for you. Gillian, I was interested in kind of, we talked a lot around the job creation, but also there is this huge problem around skills. We've got a hugely tight labour market at the moment. And we've got a hugely ambitious commitment from Labour to retrofit 19 million homes over the next decade, or less than. How worried are you about that skills issue, the issue around labour? And also, I mean, it kind of comes back to the point around quality, because I think one of the worst things we could do is kind of get 1 or 2 years into a programme like this and realise that we've not delivered it with the kind of quality and actually getting lots of complaints. And that just, there's a really positive thing about the idea that if your neighbours have been successfully retrofitted, got energy efficiency measures, got heat pumps, there's a really positive kind of impact that can have in terms of behavioural change. Because if your neighbours have got it, or they've got solar panels on their roofs, that encourages more people to do it. But equally, it happens in reverse. If they've got bad experiences, that soon spreads around. And then, Kerry, I was just going to ask you very, very quickly. I mean, I think a lot of people in this field think it is a no-brainer. Like the energy benefits, the reductions in the emissions, the knocking off of energy bills, the benefits in terms of energy security. Okay, it's got worse, but we've kind of known this for well over a decade, if not longer. I'm interested as to why you think the government hasn't done more. Is it ideological? Is it kind of the Treasury view that actually this, that the market will be doing this, and the way in which they value investment? And I'll come to Nick, Gillian, and then Kerry, and then do start thinking about your questions, because I'll come to the audience after that. Nick.
Thanks. Yeah. So, question: is there more mortgage lenders can do? Short answer, I think yes, and we do accept that. It's actually an issue within the industry that we're seeing strong collaboration on. So, lenders collectively, we know that there's a role to play. It's worth pointing out that out of those 29 million homes I mentioned, there's only 11 million with mortgages, about 40%. So we're part of the solution. We're probably not the entire solution. So I think the things we can do, we've got good reach. So Santander's got 1.2 million mortgage accounts, almost 2 million individual mortgage customers. We're traditionally or typically quite good with data, quite good with communications. So I think things like that Green Go that was mentioned, really interesting, and I think we could play a good role in delivering signposting, awareness, information. And we're starting to do a bit of that already, actually. There's lots of banks. Santander's got a Greener Homes Hub with links out to Energy Saving Trust and some other experts as well. And traffic is building on that. So we are seeing customers visit that, but we're trying to drive more customers there. Green products, of course. I mean, at the moment, they're kind of small in number, but I think there is a role for those to play. Again, Santander's got a green further advance for existing mortgage customers who want to make home efficient, energy efficient home improvements, a slightly discounted rate. And we're seeing good traction on those. About 5% of all of our further advances are on that product. So there's definitely interest in those. I think one of the things is around timing. So mortgage lenders are involved at key moments. So when a customer's moving home, or when they want to borrow more money, perhaps to do an extension or a significant rebuild, that's where they may typically come to talk to us, and we can, again, be that conduit for information and potentially financing as well. And I think the final thing I'd say on that, mortgage lenders collectively have, we believe, a role to play in making sure there isn't a two-tier system that emerges. So unintended consequences of, let's say, overly rewarding homes which are energy efficient to the detriment of homes which are not energy efficient. So what we don't want to do is lock customers out of the mortgage market because they haven't got the right type of home, particularly if they're willing to make those changes to their home to bring it up to the standards required.
Thanks very much. Skills and quality.
Okay, so you asked how worried I was. I think I'd probably put myself at worried but optimistic. So I think, and the challenge is we've got to do a number of things in tandem. So we absolutely need to invest in building skills, because we've got a massive skills shortage. We need to ensure that there's sustainable sources of funding so the businesses feel confident to invest in their staff and invest in training. And we need to do that at the same time as we tighten up consumer protections. And I think that's probably the area of the biggest tension, because you don't want to put businesses off from investing because they feel it's too much of a hassle. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we don't see the continuation of the types of scams and poor quality work that we've seen from various energy efficiency programs in the past. So we've got to get all of that right, and that will be a challenge. I think one of the ways you can do that is through building out a really good advice and redress framework. So if people are going through this journey, they've got the advice to ensure that they understand what work needs to be done, what's right for their home, what the order they should do it within, and it's proper independent advice, so it's not from someone who's trying to sell them a particular product. And I think, if you've got a system where that advice body can sort of identify any sort of emerging problems, work with appropriate regulators or code bodies to put them right as part of the system, I think you can hopefully sort of learn, and any sort of emerging problems are sort of tackled as quickly as they can so they don't become persistent. So I think that's it's achievable, it's complicated, but I think we can get it right in this country.
Just on the advice point, I should say that we did a number of citizens' juries as part of our Environmental Justice Commission, and one of the big calls was for just more information, more advice on all the things that people could be doing individually on a household level in their local community, but also more broadly as well. So we definitely agree with you on that. Kerry.
So you're asking me to explain the government's thinking, and I'm not sure I've got that sort of, I'm not pally enough with them to sort of know quite why they don't do things. But I suppose, the starting point is, in terms of the overall drive towards net zero, we've seen a fair amount of action on transport, and on the energy side is particularly, transport's been kind of flatlining, but on the energy transition until the announcements of the last week or so, we were on the right path. And I think with housing, it's just not seen as, the green side, the climate change side of it is just not seen as something that they need to worry about. They just want to get houses built. They want to make sure there's a buoyant housing market. And we saw with the mini budget on Friday, the announcement on stamp duty, which actually does nothing in terms of helping this agenda. So, I think it's just, you said, is it ideological? I'm not sure whether it's so much, I think going forward, there will be far more of an ideological approach, because that's what we've seen from the government in terms of all the noises they've made in the last week or so, that it is not their role to interfere, and they want trickle-down economics, they want the market to sort of respond. And if you look at the figures, home insulation installations more than halved in the past year, so went down from 261,000 or so to 126,000. I don't know whether that is because people are feeling under more financial pressure. I mean, you're probably best placed to sort of look at the whether it's a housing market issue. I don't know whether the fact that interest rates are going up now will deter people, because it might mean that they don't feel they can upgrade to a bigger house and take on a bigger mortgage, but they want to improve the property they've got and would go down the energy efficiency path. But on the other hand, if it means borrowing money, it could mean that they think now is not the time to actually do that. They don't want to take any more debt. So, all I can say is I feel it does need an interventionist approach from government, which then makes sure that local government is properly resourced to play their role down, further down at community level. But as to whether we can expect that, I think just given, we've not really heard much from from the new housing secretary, because they've not been in place for it. In fact, I'm struggling to even remember who it is.
Simon Clark.
Simon Clark, right? Okay, But certainly what we're hearing from the from the Bays Department and from the Treasury Department doesn't particularly inspire confidence, does it?
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you for all of those contributions and comments. I'm going to open it up to the audience. I think we've got a roving mic. Perfect. So I'll take them in groups of threes and try and get in as many as possible, particularly before Kerry has to leave at 5. So I've got Dan from Priced Out just there. The lady just sat there, a few rows back, and the person at the back. I'll come to you after.
Thanks. I'm Dan Wilson-Craw from Generation Rent. So we're we represent private renters in the UK. We did some research relatively recently, which found that one of the concerns that private renters have certainly about asking their landlords for improvements in terms of energy efficiency, is that their landlord will simply raise the rent, once the works are done. And when you think about the fact that the quality of the home would improve, there's kind of real concern that could just be reflected in the rent, and the tenant wouldn't actually benefit from the lower bills. What do the panel think about the role of grants for the private rental sector, and how to make sure that the tenants get the benefit of that rather than the landlords?
Thanks very much. The person just a couple of rows back.
Janet Birch. I'm a nasty old landlord, and I've been looking at what I can do to change my EPCs on a house I own. And I think there's a big dilemma, because I can get it up to grade C EPC, either by doing what I should do, which is insulate. But that costs a lot of money, and I don't get any return. Or I can put on solar panels, which I can do it in such a way that I can get the return on it, but it doesn't. But unless you've got a house that uses a lot of electricity, actually it doesn't, from the tenant's point of view, it doesn't actually pay in that much, because if you've got gas central heating and you've got gas cooking, then the amount of electricity you use, you'll be generating a lot more, which is good for a landlord, because you can get it in such a way that you can sell the energy and get that return. But I'm conscious that what I should be doing is insulating, and that's very expensive, and much more than I get in return for the house, or in a long term. So.
Thanks very much. Two sides of the perspectives there, from tenant and landlord there. If we just go to the person at the back, and then we'll come back to our panellists.
Thanks very much. Yes, so I'm from Canterbury in Kent. I'm a local councillor, and I'm interested to hear views about the role of the local authority. We've got a conservative run council, and we finally put pressure on them to retrofit one of our council houses, and they're going to take 18 months over it, and they're going to learn lessons about it. So we've got May elections next year, and clearly retrofitting our housing stock is going to be one of our key priorities. But I want to get some sense of what our future National Labour government is going to do to enable us as the local authority both to have the officers, the staff in place, as well as the skills, as well as obviously the supply chain staff, so that we know what we need to do to our housing stock, and we have the skills within the local authority without having to outsource that. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks very much. We've got the how do we make sure that it works for tenants and that they're not kind of impacted in terms of increasing rents and making sure that they benefit? How do we make sure it stacks up for landlords, and think about the different types of housing and the kind of electricity usage, and then the role of government? I'll come to Nick, Gillian, and then Kerry, and then we'll go for another round. And if you feel like previous people on the panel have answered it and you don't want to add anything, that's fine. We can just go back to the audience. Nick.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, really interesting point around landlords, because we've been talking about residential owner-occupied properties, and the minimum energy efficiency standards are coming in sooner for rental properties. So from 2025, landlords will have had to make improvements to bring their property up to a minimum EPC rating of C, or have spent a requisite amount attempting to do so. I think it's £10,000 per property. And although that's been around for a little while, it seems that that's gaining traction just now, that most landlords are kind of finding that out, either taking action, and we're hearing sort of indicatively, we get some research through periodically that some landlords are seeing this as a trigger to perhaps look at their portfolios and offload or sell some of their less energy efficient properties rather than trying to upgrade it. But of course, that's then going to become an owner-occupier's problem by 2035, when that target comes out. And, that seems like a long time away, but perhaps will creep up on us. So for new rentals, 2025, and for existing tenancies, I think from 2028. So it's a really salient point. Grants is an interesting thought. I think at the moment, the cost of energy going up so much, you think that it's a great time to retrofit because we're going to start to realise cost savings in that way, but they're not going to offset in the short term the energy prices. So I don't know how all that plays out in terms of rentals for individual properties. But I think the idea of grants is an interesting one that should be explored more, personally. Thanks very much.
Yeah, just on the point of grants and the private rented sector, I think it is a challenge. We've done work in this space, which we've chatted about at a previous event, and that focused on smart home products and services, where we were trying to think about how you could share the benefits between landlords and tenants, because that is quite important, that sort of tenants, given that this is sort of a really growing segment of the market, are able to sort of benefit from the changes that are happening as part of the net zero transition. It seems like you could, with some clever design, probably try and think through how that would work with energy efficiency, whether there's ways to share the benefits, whether there's some sort of, I don't know, potentially, problem is it sort of runs into the sort of landlord tenant laws in this country, which are probably not best suited to a world where we have a growing proportion of people who are going to be living in the private rented sector for the long term. So it's sort of, yeah. I think there's ways to do it. I think it's definitely worth exploring. I think it probably does need to go hand in hand with sort of wider reforms a future government might be thinking about in terms of sort of providing people who live in the private rented sector with more security. I think in terms of the question around the role of local authorities, I think their capacity building is key within local authorities. The net zero transition is going to look very different across the country, depending on what works best for individual areas in terms of the mix of sort of, whether that's hydrogen in some areas, heat pumps, district heating. So I think it's really important that there is capacity building within local authorities to be able to support that in the best ways. And I think, again, that might look different in different areas. So, yeah.
Kerry.
Yeah, I think, I don't have easy answers to the dilemma that the two of you have posed, because, on the one hand, I think landlords absolutely have a responsibility to make sure that their homes are fit for people to live in, and I'm sure that's what you do as a landlord, but we know that there are many properties that are just, people are living in incredibly squalid conditions and paying, vastly inflated rents for that. So on the one hand, we have a responsibility to try to raise standards, but we also need to make sure that cost of doing that isn't passed on, that the landlords can afford to do it, the decent landlords can afford to do it, but also that it's not passed on to the tenants. And we know, as you were saying, that far more people will be renting because they can't afford to get on the housing ladder. And it sounds a bit glib to say, basically we need to fix the whole question of affordability of housing and to make sure that rents don't skyrocket in the way that they are in places like Bristol. Then we need to make sure that there is that supply of affordable, decent housing. Obviously, any new housing we built need to be built to zero carbon home standard, which would be a very good start. But I don't think I can go beyond saying these are, you both make very good points, and I think what you were saying about the knock-on impact of the new rules that are coming in is a very valid point as well, and that's something that we need to flesh out. And I think also in terms of what you were saying, it's come up already a few times in the meetings I've had today about the Labour's climate investment pledge is capital investment, so in retrofitting houses, but you have to have that revenue stream to actually employ people to deliver those programs. And I think at the moment we're kind of at that headline level that we're committing the big spending. And I suppose it's partly because it's colleagues in different teams. I would hope that the Levelling Up team, Lisa Nandy and Matt Pennycook as housing, are, and the local government, shadow local government as well, are talking to councils about how they would, what their role would be in delivering it. But at the moment, I don't you know, I don't have the answer other than to acknowledge that it's a very, very valid point, and certainly we need to make sure that there's no point throwing money at you know, something when there's nobody actually to deliver it on the ground.
Sorry, can I just make one more point?
Yeah.
On your specific question around the insulation, there's a concept you might have heard of, fabric first is one of the kind of buzzwords around making sure that properties are insulated before you go on to make other improvements like a heat pump. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think what it highlights is the need for, which doesn't really exist at the moment in the market at all, like a proper project management approach. We'll call it a one-stop shop or something, where whether you're a landlord or a residential homeowner, you can go and get proper advice on the order and, you know, the best way to spend those funds and to make the right retrofits. And I think that is a gap in the market, which would help.
I was going to say, from our perspective, in response to your question, Dan, and generation of rent, not price out, I did know that. But both very excellent campaigning organisations on housing, obviously. But I think from our perspective on the private rented sector, I mean, we've recognised that you need kind of long-term reform of private renting. It's not fit, in our view, it's not fit for purpose. It's a much bigger sector. And you do need, you know, it's not beyond the wit of man to design such a system, not least because it exists in other countries, much longer term tenancies, rent controls within tenancies, much higher quality conditions. At the end of the day, we shouldn't be thinking about housing as a means to speculate or you know, grow the asset value. It's about providing a place to live, and I think those kind of reforms would also obviously help address those kind of things. But we do think there should be a quid pro quo. We talked about the idea of kind of low interest loans for landlords, together with strong standards and requirements to upgrade as well. It probably does need to come as a package. I've got a person there, a person here in the front row, all men with their hands up. So if there were any other women who would like to ask a question, person there and a person there, we'll try and get in as many as possible.
Okay, yeah.
But you might have to be very quick if you want Kerry to respond.
Yeah, I might just run away if they're difficult questions.
So I'm going to ask you to be really quick in order to get in as many as possible.
Right, okay, I'll do my best. I think that the point has been made that in the past this has been handled badly, and it's really important it's not handled badly going forward. And I think we're dealing with something which is not straightforward. There's a lot of uncertainty about what future technology will be, what will become mainstream. And actually, in putting insulation into a house, there are all sorts of potential practical issues around that. And I would advise anybody who's considering that to get a building surveyor who's got knowledge of climate change, etc., to do an assessment of an individual building to identify what's right for that building, and probably to supervise the works as well. And I think when you get to things like traditional houses and listed buildings, period houses and so on, they can behave in very different ways to houses built after, say, 1900. And people who are dealing with those really need to know what they're dealing with, because they're acting in different ways. The assessment methods that we have for modern houses are not actually appropriate for houses which are older and have other forms of construction.
Is there a question hidden in there?
I might just raise my voice like an Australian at the end to suggest there's a question.
Okay, well.
But really, I'm just making a point that this
Sure.
it needs to be got right, and it's not straightforward.
Thanks very much. Thomas at the front.
Hello. Yeah, my question's quite straightforward. You mentioned sort of moving from D to C in terms of the categories. I was wondering if moving from sort of C to B and then B to A is also in Labour's plan, maybe later down the line at some point, and also what the economic benefits for the households are from making those movements as well.
There's a person there.
So very quick question on just international comparisons. The French have a very kind of comprehensive grant system. The Germans have a very comprehensive loan system. I'm kind of looking more to Nick on on thoughts on the loan system, but then in general, just what kind of insights from those does Labour take to kind of step up? Because if we're talking cost of living, we're talking kind of immediate pressure, but we all know what happened with the Green Homes grant and the over enthusiasm people had for it and the complete drop off of actual tradespeople to do the work.
Hi, I'm Andy Hobson, Birkenhead CLP, and I'm retrofitting a Grade 2 listed building 2 miles over there, and I echo everything what that guy said about the difficulty. My question is all about technology, because the current existing technologies only deal with what I call the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to put a photovoltaic panel on, it's easy to fit an air source heat pump, it's easy to fill cavity walls, it's easy to put loft insulation in. That's nowhere near enough, technologically wise, to deal with all the housing stock in this country. Just look at the flats over there, totally inappropriate. And as from what Luke was saying, he's quite right when he says a fabric-first approach. Insulating houses is hard and difficult. There are already cowboys out there basically wrecking houses and giving really poor advice. Most of my question is, where are the technologies going to come from? Where are the skills going to come from and the advice going to come from to do a proper job of insulating our housing stock?
So I know that others want to ask questions, but I know Kerry's got to go. So where's the tech coming from, international examples, and the standard that Labour is aspiring to? And then if you want to respond to anything in the gentleman's comment. Yeah.
Well, I think if I go back to my opening remarks, it was just acknowledging that there is an issue about how we deliver on this and how do we, and it's a problem with the sort of skills across the board in terms of our first meeting this morning was about what sort of skills strategy you have in terms of green jobs and who is responsible for sort of driving that, for identifying the need and driving it forward. And at the moment, there's some good work being done on a piecemeal basis, but there's not an overarching strategy. So we absolutely need that. We need people to have confidence, as was said, because, partly because there's such a bad history of delivery of these schemes. So people need to have confidence financially, that it's that the funding is going to be there and that it's going to pay off for them and help bring their bills down. They've got to have confidence the work will be done efficiently, and they're not going to suddenly find that they face extra costs and the people will actually, the work that will be done to standard. And so I suppose what I'd say is, we learn the lessons of the past, we look at where the previous schemes went wrong, we create certainty so that people know that, this is, there's going to be a decade of investment. It's an opportunity for good, decent people, not just the scammers, to get involved in this. But there will be a need for sort of quality controls and, absolutely to have the right training. So it's all I can say is, it's a job of work that needs to be done to make sure that we are ready to deliver on this, and that we're ready to do that the moment we get into government. On terms of the EPs, whether we go above C, I think the 90 million homes we talk about are homes that are below sea level. And I suppose the question is, whether you want to try to bring as many possible up to a reasonable standard, or whether you want to go above and beyond. So the aim is that the money would be available for the ones that are below that standard. It's not so much that there's a target as to how far that we were going to get them to, because I think that very much depends from property to property, and it might well be that you identify a certain amount of funding. So doing this, we've got experts in the audience on home insulation and doing all these measures, but it might be that you do certain things to one property that would get you up to B, or you do very similar things to another property that would only get you up to C. So I don't think we'd want to get prescriptive, we just want to get it up to a reasonable standard, but obviously if you go above and beyond that would be good. But again, all the details of this need to be fleshed out. So I think it's great that we've got the objective of doing this and the ambition to do the 90 million homes. I think the fact that we're talking about green stuff all this week at conference would hopefully inspire people that, they need to get moving on the Greens agenda, that colleges and local enterprise partnerships and local authorities all need to, sort of step up in terms of this is where the jobs of the future are going to be. But then we need to flesh out how we make sure that it becomes a reality.
Thanks very much, Kerry. I know Kerry's got to go now. We will put your questions to the other panellists if you would like to stay and take a few more. If we could just thank Kerry for her time in the usual way. Thanks, Kerry. Thanks. Yeah, we haven't got any more events today, so. Oh, I'll see you at the Sierra Rally. Well, yeah. I'm going to follow Kerry around the conference for a little bit longer. I'm going to come to Gillian to see whether you had any responses to those questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we've already talked about, the main thing we've got to challenge, or the main thing we have to build on, is improving the skills gap we've got at the moment. And I think another thing that we've not previously mentioned is ensuring that the trade bodies for the installers, the people who carry out this work, are sort of on board with this. Because I think when you talk to people who are doing installations and retrofitting homes at the moment, that seems to be where there's a lot of challenges, where things don't necessarily go to plan, where the sort of people will have a sort of course of action that they're set upon. But then the builder sort of says, oh, do you really want to do that? I'm not sure that's the right approach. So I think there is going to need to be a sort of targeted education campaign with these bodies as well, because these are the people of the future who will be retrofitting our homes, and they need to be au fait with the new technologies and the benefits that they bring. So I think that's sort of another strand we need to build into this. And I think, again, going back to the sort of consumer protection piece, at the moment, it's too easy for businesses, because a lot of this work is carried out by often sole traders or very small businesses. It's too easy for companies to kind of quietly close down and not take any responsibility for poor quality work that's being carried out. It's much harder when you've got larger businesses who tend to be regulated in different ways. So I think that's something else we need to figure out how we're going to tackle, because otherwise we're never going to get away from the sort of problems we've got in this sector, where it's too easy to do poor quality work and not get held to account.
Thanks very much, Nick.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of extra points. There was one around the EPCs and the is C enough if I'm a D, I get to a C. I think there's two key timelines. There's 2035, which is for all homes to get to a C. And there's 2050, where the forecasts are lots more homes are going to have to be better than a C if we're going to reach net zero in the UK. So even homes that are being built today, and 90% of them are in A or B, mostly B, even some of those will have to be retrofitted, which sounds bizarre because they haven't been built yet, to make them even more energy efficient by 2050 on that time horizon. There was a question around best practices, I think, from other countries, and France and Germany were mentioned. Scandinavia is another interesting one. We see, I think, that the highest penetration of heat pumps in the world is in Norway. 60% of all homes have run through heat pumps. So they're years ahead of us. So we are looking, as a mortgage lending industry, but I'm sure other industries are as well, how we can replicate some of those models. And I think in the countries where we see it working best, it's a combination of, funding and products from lenders, but also in tandem combination with the right support from government centrally, and the two work together well.
Thanks very much. I'll take a few more questions if there are. The person at the back, and the person at the back there as well. And then you all sat at the back in this round of questions.
Thank you. Mike Leonard from the Building Alliance. And unfortunately, my colleague from the Federation of Master Builders, one of those trade bodies, has just had to leave. But I think it's incredibly important that we get the responsible end of the market involved in this. For them to do so, and for the FE colleges and everything else, they do need certainty. Mm-hmm. So they do know that financial incentive that's there, that's going to be consistent, because homeowners are not going to invest without, especially in the private sector, unless they've got some incentive to do so. And secondly, how are we going to bring the public along with us on this journey? Often ignored, but we can't do this to people. These are their homes. So, and what we know already is that where there's been big local authority retrofit schemes, some of the demonstrator projects, a lot of people have refused to have the work done because they don't trust what's going on. So I think it's a big trust and confidence thing to build as well. So, I'm just really asking, how we do that, how we get that certainty, how we get that, maybe it's a licensing model, I don't know, but some sort of system with insurance backed or whatever it is that helps us to get that certainty into the market and consumer confidence to deliver this in the longer term. And my last point was ventilate when you insulate. Yeah, I keep hearing insulate, and I don't hear ventilate. If you don't ventilate, you'll have the problems that we had with Eco and the Green Deal.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Juliet from E3G. Thanks for great speeches. My question's for Gillian, but also anyone else on the panel, regarding the kind of consumer protection and standards piece, because a lot of the installers we speak to are also very concerned about the so-called cowboys, because they recognise that this is harmful for building the market in the long run. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on kind of the pros and cons of voluntary versus mandatory approaches here, and the kind of progress we might hope to kind of advocate for in the short and longer term. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And there was just another person there. Our councillor from earlier.
Thank you for letting me have a second question. I've got a second question. I've got a comment. I'm hoping that that these later questions and comments will be fed back to the MP. I appreciate she had to go. My comment is that the answers from our MP were about these things need to be fleshed out. I think I would have liked to have heard more confidence that she and her department and our shadow cabinet are working on it with confidence. So that would be some feedback. And then as a private citizen, I live in a block of flats. I'm a leaseholder, so I'm not a renter, but I'm not a freeholder either. And our block of flats had to be retrofitted because of a fire. And the comment of the previous about some people didn't want to be decanted to be to be fireproofed. In the end, it all worked out. But I can see that there could be a nightmare there. And what if I want to upgrade my property to be C or above or whatever, but my freeholder or my our management group are not playing ball? I'm wondering about government mandate for this in the future. There must be millions of us in that situation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So there was trust and confidence there, consumer protection, and that kind of freehold versus leasehold point. On the point you made about, obviously I'm not here to speak for Labour, but I do know that they are, in addition to the kind of announcement that they made last year, they do have working groups, including on retrofit, to kind of further flesh out and work out the plan, the delivery model of how you actually do this. So I know that they are doing quite a lot of work, including with us and other stakeholders, on how you make that. But I will pass that back. Gillian.
Sure. On the trust and confidence point, I think we need to accept this is going to take time. This is a big ask we're asking of the public to invest in making changes to their homes or having changes made to their homes depending on their sort of circumstances. And I think it's got to come back to we need independent advice as a start. We need things like local demonstrators and stuff like that in communities so people can go and sort of see the technology in practice and start to understand what it might mean for them, how it might work in their homes. And it's going to take a while to bring the public along. And I think if we can accompany that with some sort of tightening of the consumer protection regime, that will help as well. So people will know when they start off on this journey, they are properly protected in case anything goes wrong. I think in terms of the voluntary versus mandatory approaches, I think the first step we need is a move to a single accreditation, a single code in this space. This is something I've got experience of. I've got a non-exec role on the New Homes Quality Board. That has involved sort of closing down a number of codes that covered new home purchases and the creation of a single code. I think that's what needs to happen in this space as well. It's too easy for people to fall through the gaps, and it's too confusing for people to understand what protections they do have. And it feels quite fixable that we can do that. And I think in terms of the sort of mandatory, I think you need to start gradually tightening that over time. You can probably start as voluntary and then sort of tighten up over the years as this sort of becomes much more mainstream.
Thanks. Nick.
Yeah, really good point about bringing the public along, because some of the research we saw, cost is the obvious barrier. People saying, well, a heat pump costs X times more than a gas boiler, so why would I do that? But as well as the cost, quite often mentioned is the disruption. And people don't necessarily want to have something the size of a washing machine attached to the wall in their garden and have to change their radiators indoors as well. So I think there's lots of barriers that probably need to be overcome for some customers. Codes, absolutely agree with. And then the specific question around flats, apartments, and another one is listed buildings as well. I think they are clearly gaps, and that there's more questions around those areas than there are answers at the moment, and they need to be fixed, and fixed soon, because we can't afford to leave millions of homes behind in this retrofit revolution. So really valid question. I don't really have an answer, I'm afraid.
Thanks very much. I'll do one more round of questions if there are them. So we've got a person here in front row.
It isn't really a question, it's a comment. I sit on a planning development committee in my local authority, and we are still getting applications to build new houses with gas boilers. When are the building regulations going to be changed so that they can no longer install gas boilers? I mean, we're now getting applications said, well, they're retrofit ready. Nonsense, isn't it? Absolute nonsense. And, this is all very complicated, obviously, but that's the very first step we should take, surely. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Got a person there, and then a person there, and then I think we'll do that, and then we'll wrap up.
It's just, I've had a company get in touch with me about insulation. The house I'm looking at insulating is single brick. It's 1900s. But they're saying, oh, we're only interested in doing it internal installation because we've had problems with local authorities wanting building permission and things to do it externally. And I know that trying to internally do what is a small house you'd have to take the kitchen out, you'd have to take the bathroom out. I'm not sure how they would get over the thermal bridges with the stairs. It's just a nonsense that anybody should be thinking on small houses, 3-bedroom or terraced houses, that they're doing it internally and not externally. And yet, what they're saying is that local authorities are asking for planning permission and sometimes not giving it. So, can we do something about that?
Thanks very much.
Very quick question. It was announced just before we started that the Chancellor will be delivering a sort of another mini budget in mid-November. So, if he's still Chancellor, and I was wondering if there was one thing you'd like him to announce, what would it be?
Good question. Good question to finish on. Come to Nick and Gillian, and then we'll wrap up. Nick.
Okay. Question on gas boilers. 2025 is the date when new homes will no longer be able to be built with a gas boiler, which feels maybe too far away, but there is a date at least there. Insulation. I'm afraid I'm not an expert on that. I get the point. I don't really see why there should be such barriers on external, but I mean, it comes down then to local authorities. Maybe we can have a chat afterwards. Might be able to signpost you somewhere. And then the question, my wish, I'm going to make it professional wish rather than a personal one, is maybe meaningful grants to encourage retrofits, particularly if they can be somehow more meaningful for lower income households.
Thanks very much. Julian.
So just the question on planning, I think there is going to need more planning reform. So one of the things I recently did is looked into whether or not I could get a heat pump. And basically until there's more planning reform, I'm stuck because I live in a mid-terrace with a tiny garden, and I have no place to put the heat pump that is more than 1 meter away from my neighbors. So I think that's just sort of, and solid wall insulation is really, really complicated to do internally. And if we do want to get it moving, we probably need to think about whether or not we can do that in the right way. I think in terms of the budget, so my colleague tweeted this out last week. The budget announced an extra $1 billion for eco over the next couple of years, which is the energy company obligation delivered by suppliers. But the government's also going to be spending $1 billion every 3 days on the new cap on the cap. So I think, you know, we could put some more money into energy efficiency, and that would start making much more of a difference for many households in trying to tackle the demand problem we've got in this country. Seems like priorities are the wrong way around there. So let's hopefully, if there's an opportunity in the new November budget, let's get more money for energy efficiency and potentially more targeted support for people who are not going to be able to make it through this winter with the new £2,500 average energy bills.
Thanks very much. And for me, I think my one answer would be Green Go, which sounds quite simple. There was quite a lot that sits under that, which would be a one-stop shop advice service with grants and loans, so funding for that, and a big push around advertising around that. I think we think a kind of really simple scheme, and we also think that should be open to kind of EV loans and grants and cycle things as well, like a really well-known brand that can, you know, really get people on board, understand where they need to go, get their support and get their advice. I mean, I have to admit, I'm not holding my breath. I suspect the mini budget in November might be spent undoing some of the things from the one we've just had, but the reversals get quicker, but who knows. I just wanted to thank our speakers, Nick, Gillian, and Kerry in her absence for speaking today, and thank you very much for your questions. It's been really wide-ranging and also really detailed. It's clear there's a lot of expertise in the room. We do a lot of work on retrofit at IPPR. We're planning on doing further work further this year and into next. So if you ever want to get in touch, we're always happy to speak to people. There's obviously a wide range of expertise from local government to landlords, to tenants organisations, and those involved in the actual retrofitting itself. So please do get in touch. But if we could just thank our speakers and also yourselves for coming as well. Thanks very much.